Rumpole à la Carte by John Mortimer, and read by Rumpole himself. I suppose, when I have time to think about it, which is not often during the long day's trudge round the Old Bailey, and more down-market venues, such as the Uxbridge Magistrates' Court, I suppose the law represents some attempt, however fumbling, to impose order on a chaotic universe. A chaos in the form of human waywardness and uncontrollable passion is ever bubbling away just beneath the surface, and its sporadic outbreaks are what provides me with my daily crust, and even a glass or two of Pomeroy's Plonk to go with it. I have often noticed in the accounts of the many crimes with which I have been concerned that some small sign of disorder, an unusual number of milk bottles on a doorstep, a car parked on a double yellow line by a normally law-abiding citizen, even in the Penge bungalow murders, someone else's mackintosh taken from an office peg, some small sign that has been the first indication of anarchy taking over. The clue that such dark forces were at work in La Maison Jean-Pierre was very small indeed. La Maison Jean-Pierre, one of the few London eateries to have achieved 3 Michelin stars and to charge more for a bite of dinner for 2 than I get for legal aid theft. Now, my wife, Hilda, is a good, plain cook. Now, in saying that, I'm not referring to she who must be obeyed moral values or passing any judgment on her personal appearance. No. No, what I can tell you is that she cooks without flights of fancy. Oh, but she is not in any way a woman who lacks imagination. Indeed, some of the things she imagines Rumpole gets up to when out of her sight are colourful in the extreme. But she doesn't apply such gifts to a chop or a potato, being quite content to grill the one and boil the other. She can also boil a cabbage into submission and fry fish. The nearest her cooking comes to the poetic is perhaps in her baked jam roll, which I've always found to be an emotion best recollected in tranquillity. From all this you will gather that Hilda's honest cooking is sufficient but not exotic, and that happily the terrible curse of nouvelle cuisine has not infected Froxbury mansions in the Gloucester Road. So it is not often that I am confronted with the sort of fare photographed in the Sunday supplements. I scarcely ever sit down to an octagonal plate on which a sliver of monkfish is arranged in a composition of pastel shades, which also features a brush stroke of pink sauce, a single peeled prawn, and a sprig of dill. Such gluttony is happily beyond my means. It wasn't, however, beyond the means of Hilda's cousin Everard, who was visiting us from Canada, where he carried on a thriving trade as a company lawyer. He told us that he felt we stood in dire need of what he called a taste of gracious living, and booked a table for 3 at La Maison Jean-Pierre. So we found ourselves in an elegantly appointed room with subdued lighting and even more subdued conversation, where the waiters padded around like priests and the customers behaved as though they were in church. The climax of the ritual came when the dishes were set on the table under silvery domes which were lifted to the whispered command of 1, 2, 3, to reveal the somewhat mingy portions on offer. Cousin Everard was a grey-haired man in a pale grey suiting who talked about his legal experiences in greyish tones. He entertained us with a long account of a takeover bid for the Winnipeg Soap Company, which had cleared $4 million for his clients, the Great Elk Bank of Canada. Hearing this, Hilda said accusingly, "You've never cleared $4 million for a client, have you, Rumpole? You should be a company lawyer like Everard." "Oh, I think I'll stick to crime," I told them. "At least it's a more honest type of robbery." "Nonsense. Robbery has never got us a dinner at La Maison Jean-Pierre. We'd never be here if Cousin Everard hadn't come all the way from Saskatchewan to visit us." Yes, indeed, from the town of Saskatoon, Hilda. Everard gave her a greyish smile. Oh, you see, Hilda, I said, all the way from, where? Saskatoon. Ah, yes. Crime doesn't pay, Horace, the man from the land of the igloos told me. You should know that by now. Of course, we have several fine dining restaurants in Saskatoon these days, but nothing to touch this. He continued his inspection of the menu. Hilda, may I make so bold as to ask, what is your pleasure? During the ensuing discussion, my attention strayed. Staring idly round the consecrated area, I was startled to see in the gloaming a distinct sign of human passion in revolt against the forces of law and order. At a table for two, I recognized Claude Erskine Brown, opera buff, hopeless cross-examiner, and long-time member of our chambers in Equity Court. But was he dining tete-a-tete with his wife, the handsome and successful QC, Mrs. Philida Erskine Brown, at the portion of our group, as law and order demanded? The answer to that was no. He was entertaining a young and decorative lady solicitor named Patricia, known to herself as Tricia, Benbow. Her long golden hair, which often provoked whistles from the cruder junior clerks round the Old Bailey, hung over her slim and suntanned shoulders, and one generously ringed hand rested on Claude's as she gazed in her usual appealing way up into his eyes. She couldn't gaze into them for long, as Claude, no doubt becoming uneasily aware of the unexpected presence of a couple of Rumpoles in the room, hid his face behind a hefty wine list. At that moment, an extremely superior brand of French head waiter manifested himself beside our table, announced his presence with a discreet cough, and led off with, Madame, Monsieur, tonight Jean-Pierre recommends for the main course la pesée de la poitrine du canard au céleri et épinards crus. Poesy! Hilda sounded delighted and kindly explained. That's poetry, Rumpole. Tastes a good deal better than that old Wordsworth of yours, I shouldn't be surprised. Tell us about it, George. Everard smiled at the waiter. Whet our appetites. This is just a few wafer thin slices of breast of duck, marinated in a drop or two of armagnac, delicately grilled and served with a celery remoulade and some leaves of spinach lightly steamed. And mash? I interrupted the man to ask. Excusez-moi. The fellow seemed unable to believe his ears. Mashed spuds come with it, do they? Shh, Rumpole. Hilda was displeased with me, but turned all her charms on Georges. I will have the poesy. It sounds delicious. A culinary experience, Hilda. Yes, poesy for me too, please. Everard fell into line. I would like a poesy of steak and kidney pudding, not pie, with mashed potatoes and a big scoop of boiled cabbage. English mustard, if you have it. It seemed a reasonable enough request. Rumpole, Hilda's whisper was menacing. Behave yourself. This pudding, Georges was puzzled, is not on our menu. Your pleasure is our delight. It says that on the menu. Couldn't you ask Cookie if she would pleasure me? Along those lines. Cookie? I do not know who monsieur means by a cookie. Our maître de cuisine is Jean-Pierre O'Higgins himself. He is in the kitchen now. Oh, how very convenient. Have a word in his shell-like, why don't you? For a tense moment it seemed as though the looming priestly figure of Georges was about to excommunicate me, drive me out of the temple, or at least curse me by bell, book, and candle. However, after muttering, si vous le voulez, excusez-moi, He went off in search of higher authority. Hilda apologized for my behaviour and told Cousin Everard that she supposed I thought I was being funny. I assured her that there was absolutely nothing particularly funny about a steak and kidney pudding. Then I was aware of a huge presence at my elbow. A tall, fat, red-faced man in a chef's costume was standing with his hands on his hips and asking, "Is there someone here wants to lodge a complaint?" Jean-Pierre O'Higgins, I was later to discover, was the product of an Irish father and a French mother. He spoke in the tones of those Irishmen who come up in a menacing manner and stand far too close to you in pubs. He was well known, I had already heard it rumoured, for dominating both his kitchen and his customers. His phenomenal rudeness to his guests seemed to be regarded as one of the attractions of his establishment. The gourmets of London didn't feel that their dinners had been entirely satisfactory, unless they were served up by way of a savoury with a couple of insults from Jean-Pierre O'Higgins. Well, yes, I said, there is someone. Oh, yes? O'Higgins had clearly never heard of the old adage about the customer always being right. And are you the joker that requested mash? Am I to understand you to be saying, I inquired as politely as I knew how, that there are to be no mashed spuds for my delight? Look here, my friend, I don't know who you are. Jean-Pierre went on in an unfriendly fashion, and Everard did his best to introduce me. Oh, this is Horace Rumpole, Jean-Pierre, the criminal lawyer. Criminal lawyer, eh? Jean-Pierre was unappeased. Well, don't commit your crimes in my restaurant. If you want mashed spuds, I suggest you move down to the working men's cafe at the end of the street. That's a very helpful suggestion. I was, as you see, trying to be as pleasant as possible. You might get a few bangers while you're about it, and a bottle of OK sauce. That'd suit your delicate palate, would it? Oh, very well indeed. I'm not a great one for wafer-thin slices of anything. You don't look it. Well, now, let's get this straight. People who come into my restaurant damn well eat as I tell them to. Oh, and I'm sure you win them all over with your irresistible charm. I gave him the retort courteous. As the chef seemed about to explode, Hilda weighed in with a well-meaning, I'm sure my husband doesn't mean to be rude. It's just, well, we don't dine out very often. And this is such a delightful room, isn't it? Your husband? Jean-Pierre looked at she who must be obeyed with deep pity. You have all my sympathy, you unfortunate woman. Let me tell you, Mr. Rumpole, this is La Maison Jean-Pierre. I have 3 stars in the Michelin. I have thrown out an Arabian king because he ordered filet mignon well cooked. I have sent film stars away in tears because they dared to mention Thousand Island dressing. I am Jean-Pierre O'Higgins, the greatest culinary genius now working in England. I must confess that during this speech from the patron I found my attention straying. The other diners, as is the way with the English at the trough, were clearly straining their ears to catch every detail of the row, whilst ostentatiously concentrating on their plates. The pale, bespectacled girl making up the bills behind the desk in the corner seemed to have no such inhibitions. She was staring across the room and looking at me, I thought, as though I had thoroughly deserved the O'Higgins rebuke. And then I saw 2 waiters approach Erskine Brown's table with domed dishes, which they laid on the table with due solemnity. And let me tell you, Jean-Pierre's oration continued, I started my career with salads at La Grande Bouffe in Lyon under the great Ducasse. I was rôtisseur at Le Crillon, Boston. I have run this restaurant for 20 years, and I have never, let me tell you, in my whole career, served up a mashed spud. The climax of his speech was dramatic, but not nearly as startling as the events which took place at Erskine Brown's table. To the count of 1, 2, 3, the waiters removed the silver covers, and from under the one in front of Tricia Benbow Perfectly visible in the light of a table candle, there sprang a small, alarmed brown mouse, which had presumably been nibbling at the posy. At this, the elegant lady solicitor uttered a piercing scream and leapt onto a chair. There she stood, with her skirt held down to as near her knees as possible, screaming in an ever-rising scale towards some ultimate crescendo. Meanwhile, the stricken Claude looked just as a man who'd planned to have a quiet dinner with a lady and wanted to attract no one's attention would look under such circumstances. "Please, Tricia," I could hear his plaintive whisper, "don't scream. People are noticing us." "I say, old darling," I couldn't help saying to that three-star man O'Higgins, "they had a mouse on that table. Is it the spécialité de la maison?" A few days later, at breakfast in the mansion flat, glancing through the post, mainly bills and begging letters from Her Majesty, who seemed to be pushed for a couple of quid, and would be greatly obliged if I'd let her have a little tax money on account, I saw a glossy brochure for a hotel in the Lake District. Although in the homeland of my favourite poet, Le Chateau Dudden, Lakeland's a paradise of gracious living, didn't sound like old Wordsworth's cup of tea, despite the king-sized four-poster in the Samuel Taylor Coleridge suite. Cousin Everard wants to take me up there for a break. Hilda, who was clearing away, removed a half-drunk cup of tea from my hand. "A break from what?" I was mystified. "From you, Rumpole. Don't you think I need it? After that disastrous evening at La Maison?" "Oh, was it a disaster? I quite enjoyed it. England's greatest chef laboured and gave birth to a ridiculous mouse. People would pay good money to see a trick like that." "You were the disaster, Rumpole," she said, as she consigned my last piece of toast to the tidy bin. "You were unforgivable. Mashed spuds. Why ever did you use such a vulgar expression?" "Hilda," I protested, I thought reasonably, "I have heard some fairly fruity language around the courts in the course of a long life of crime, but I've never heard it suggested that the words mashed spuds would bring a blush to the cheek of the tenderest virgin." "Don't try to be funny, Rumpole. You upset that brilliant chef, Mr. O'Higgins. You deeply upset Cousin Everard." "Oh, well, I had to put a case for the defence. Everard kept on suggesting I didn't make enough to feed you properly. Typical commercial lawyer. Criminal law is about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Commercial law is about money. That's what I think, anyway." Hilda looked at me, weighed up the evidence, and summed up, not entirely in my favour. "I don't think you made that terrible fuss because of what you thought about the commercial law," she said. "You did it because you have to be a character, don't you, wherever you go? Well, I don't know if I'm going to be able to put up with your character much longer." I don't know why, but what she said made me feel quite suddenly, and in a most unusual way, uncertain of myself. What was Hilda talking about exactly? I asked for further and better particulars. "You have to be one all the time, don't you?" She was clearly getting into her stride. "With your cigar ash down your waistcoat, and your steak and kidney, and your Pomeroy's ordinary red, and your arguments, always arguments. Why do you have to go on arguing, Rumpole?" "Arguing? It's been my life, Hilda," I tried to explain. "Well, it's not mine, not any more. Cousin Everard doesn't argue in public. He is quiet and polite." "Oh, well, if you like that sort of thing." The subject of Cousin Everard was starting to pall on me. "Yes, Rumpole, yes, I do. That's why I agreed to go on this trip." "Trip?" "Everard and I are going to tour all the restaurants in England with stars. We're going to Bath and York and Devizes. And you can stay here and eat all the mashed spuds you want." "What?" I hadn't up till then taken Le Chateau Dudden entirely seriously. "You really mean it?" Oh, yes, I think so. The living is hardly gracious here, is it?" On the way to my place of work, I spent an uncomfortable quarter of an hour thinking over what she who must be obeyed had said about me having to be a character. It seemed an unfair charge. I drink Chateau Thames Embankment because it's all I can afford. It keeps me regular and blots out certain painful memories, such as a bad day in court in front of Judge Graves, an old darling who undoubtedly passes iced water every time he goes to the gents. I enjoy the fragrance of a small cigar. I relish an argument. This is the way of life I have chosen. I don't have to do any of these things in order to be a character. Do I? I was jerked out of this unaccustomed introspection on my arrival in the clerk's room at Chambers. Henry, our clerk, was striking bargains with solicitors over the telephone, whilst Diane sat in front of her typewriter, her head bowed over a lengthy and elaborate manicure. Uncle Tom, our oldest inhabitant, who hadn't had a brief in court since anyone can remember, was working hard at improving his putting skills with an old mashy niblick and a clutch of golf balls, the whole being represented by the wastepaper basket laid on its side. Almost as soon as I got into this familiar environment, I was comforted by the sight of a man who seemed to be in far deeper trouble than I was. Claude Erskine Brown came up to me in a manner that I can only describe as furtive. "Rumpole," he said. "As you may know, Philly is away in Cardiff doing a long fraud." "Your wife," I congratulated the man, "goes from strength to strength." "No, what I mean is, Rumpole," Claude's voice sank below the level of Henry's telephone calls, "you may have noticed me the other night in La Maison Jean-Pierre." "Noticed you, Claude? Of course not. You were only in the company of a lady who stood on a chair and screamed like a banshee with toothache. No one could have possibly noticed you." I did my best to comfort the man. "It was purely a business arrangement," he reassured me. "Yeah? Pretty rum way of conducting business." "The lady was Miss Tricia Benbow, my instructing solicitor in the VAT case," he told me, as though that explained everything. "Claude, I have had some experience of the law, and it's a good plan when entertaining solicitors in order to tout for briefs, not to introduce mice into their plat de jeu." The telephone by Diane's typewriter rang. She blew on her nail lacquer and answered it as Claude's voice rose in anguished protest. "Good heavens, you don't think I did that, do you, Rumpole? The whole thing was a disaster, an absolute tragedy, which may have appalling consequences." "Your wife on the phone, Mr. Erskine Brown?" Diane interrupted him, and Claude went to answer the call with all the eager cheerfulness of a French aristocrat who is told the tumbril is at the door. As he was telling his wife he hoped things were going splendidly in Cardiff, and that he rarely went out in the evenings, in fact usually settled down to a scrambled egg in front of the telly, there was a sound of rushing water without, and our head of chambers joined us. "Something extremely serious has happened." Sam Ballard, Q.C., made the announcement as though war had broken out. He is a pallid sort of person who usually looks as though he's just bitten into a sour apple. His hair, I have to tell you, seems to be slicked down with some kind of pomade. "Oh, someone nicked a nail-brush in the Chambers loo," I suggested helpfully. "How did you guess?" He turned on me amazed, as though I had the gift of second sight. "Well, it corresponds to your idea of something serious, and I notice such things," I said. "Odd that you should know immediately what I was talking about, Rumpole." By now Ballard's amazement had turned to deep suspicion. "Not guilty, my lord," I assured him. "Didn't you have a meeting of your God-bothering society here last week?" "The Lawyers as Christians Committee. We met here. What of it?" "Cleanliness is next to godliness. Isn't that their motto? The devout are notable nail-brush nickers." As I said this, I watched Erskine Brown lay the telephone to rest and leave the room with an air of a man who had merely postponed the evil hour. Ballard was still on the subject of serious crime in the facilities.
"It's of vital importance in any place of work, Henry," he batted on, "that the highest standards of hygiene are maintained. Now, I've been instructed by the City Health Authority in an important case. It would be extremely embarrassing to me personally if my chambers were found wanting in the matter of a nail-brush."
"Well, don't look at me, Mr. Ballard." Henry was not taking this lecture well.
"I am accusing nobody."
Ballard sounded unconvincing.
"But look to it, Henry, please, look to it."
Then our head of chambers left us. Feeling my usual reluctance to start work, I asked Uncle Tom, as something of an expert in these matters, if it would be fair to call me a character.
"A what, Rumpole?"
"A character, Uncle Tom."
"Oh, they had one of those in old Sniffy Greengrass's chambers in Lamb Court," Uncle Tom remembered. "Fellow called Dalrymple lived in an absolutely filthy flat over a chemist's shop in Chancery Lane. Used to lead a cat around the temple on a long bit of pink tape. Old Dalrymple's a character, they used to say, and the other fellows in chambers were rather proud of him."
"Well, I don't do anything like that, do I?" I asked for reassurance.
"Oh, I hope not,"
Uncle Tom was kind enough to say.
"This Dalrymple finally went across the road to do an undefended divorce. In his pyjamas. I believe they had to lock him up. I wouldn't say you were a character, Rumpole. Well, not yet, anyway."
"Oh, thank you, Uncle Tom. Perhaps you could mention that to she who must." And then the day took on a distinct turn for the better. Henry put down his phone after yet another call, and my heart leapt up when I heard that Mr. Bernard, my favourite instructing solicitor, because he keeps quiet, does what he's told, and hardly ever tells me about his bad back, was coming over, and was anxious to instruct me in a new case which was not on the legal aid. As I left the room to go about this business, I had one final question for Uncle Tom. That fellow Dalrymple, he didn't play golf in the clerk's room, did he?"
"Good heavens, no."
Uncle Tom seemed amused at my ignorance of the world.
"He was a character, you see. He'd hardly do anything normal."
Mr. Bernard, balding, pinstriped, with a greying moustache and a kindly eye, through all our triumphs and disasters, remained imperturbable. No confession made by any client, however bizarre, seemed to surprise him, nor had any revelation of evil shocked him. He lived through our days of murder, mayhem, and fraud as though he were listening to Gardener's Question Time. He was interested in growing roses and in his daughter's nursing career. He spent his holidays in remote spots like Bangkok and the Seychelles. He always went away, he told me, on a package, and returned with considerable relief. I was always pleased to see Mr. Bernard, but that day he seemed to have brought me something far from my usual line of country.
My client, Mr. Rumpole, first consulted me because his marriage was on the rocks, not to put too fine a point on it."
"Ah, it happens, Mr. Bernard. Many marriages are seldom off them."
Particularly so if, as in this case, the wife is of foreign extraction. It's long been my experience, Mr. Rumpole, that you can't beat foreign wives for being vengeful. In this case, extremely vengeful."
"Hell hath no fury, Mr. Bernard," I suggested.
"Exactly, Mr. Rumpole. You put your finger on the nub of the case, as you would say yourself."
"Oh, I haven't done a matrimonial for years. My divorce may be a little rusty," I told him modestly.
"Oh, we're not asking you to do the divorce. We're sending that to Mr. Tite Smith in Crown Office Row."
Oh, well, I thought, with only a slight pang of disappointment, good luck to bright little Tite Smith.
The matrimonial is not my client's only problem,"
Mr. Bernard told me. When sorrows come, Mr. Bernard, they come not single spies, but in battalions. Your chap got something else on his plate, has he?"
"On his plate? Ah, the phrase seemed to cause my solicitor some amusement. That's very apt, that is, and apter than you know, Mr. Rumpole."
"Well, don't keep me in suspense. Who is this mysterious client?"
"I wasn't to divulge the name, Mr. Rumpole, in case you should refuse to act for him. He thought you might have taken against him, so he's coming to appeal to you in person. I asked Henry if he'd show him up as soon as he arrived."
And dead on cue, Diane knocked on my door, threw it open, and announced,
"Mr. O'Higgins."
The large man, dressed now in a deafening checked tweed jacket and a green turtleneck sweater, looking less like a chef than an Irish horse coper, advanced on me with a broad grin and his hand extended in a greeting, which was in strong contrast to our last encounter. "I rely on you to save me, Mr. Rumpole," he boomed. "You're the man to do it, sir, the great criminal defender."
"Oh,
I thought I was the criminal in your restaurant," I reminded him. "I have to tell you, Mr. Rumpole, your courage took my breath away. Do you know what he did, Mr. Bernard? Do you know what this little fellow here had the pluck to do? He only ordered mashed spuds in La Maison Jean-Pierre, a risk no one else has taken in all the time I've been maître de cuisine."
Well, it didn't seem to be particularly heroic, I told Bernard, but O'Higgins would have none of that.
"I tell you, Mr. Bernard," he moved very close to my solicitor and towered over him, "a man who could do that to Jean-Pierre couldn't be intimidated by all the judges in the Queen's Bench. What do you say then, Mr. Horace Rumpole? Will you take me on?"
I didn't answer him immediately, but sat at my desk, lit a small cigar, and looked at him critically. "I don't know yet," I said.
"Is it my personality that put you off?"
My prospective client folded himself into my armchair with one leg draped over an arm. He grinned even more broadly, displaying a judiciously placed gold tooth.
"Do you find me objectionable?"
"Mr. O'Higgins," I decided to give judgment at length, "I think your restaurant pretentious and your portions skimpy. Your customers eat in a dim religious atmosphere which seems to be more like evensong than a good night out. You appear to be a self-opinionated and self-satisfied bully. I have known many murderers who could teach you a lesson in courtesy. However, Mr. Bernard tells me that you are prepared to pay my fee, and in accordance with the great traditions of the bar, I am on hire to even the most unattractive customer." There was a silence, and I wondered if the inflammable restaurateur was about to rise and hit me. But he turned to Bernard with even greater enthusiasm.
"Just listen to that! Now, how's that for eloquence? We picked the right one here, Mr. Bernard."
"Well, now, I gather you're in some sort of trouble. Apart from your marriage, that is." I unscrewed my pen and prepared to take a note.
"Ah, this has nothing to do with my marriage."
But then he frowned unhappily.
"Anyway, I don't think it has."
"You haven't done away with this vengeful wife of yours? Was I to be presented with a murder?"
"Ah, I should have long ago," Jean-Pierre admitted. "But no, Simone is still alive and suing. Isn't that right, Mr. Bernard?"
"It is, Mr. O'Higgins," Bernard assured him gloomily. "It is indeed, but this is something quite different. My client, Mr. Rumpole, is being charged under the Food and Hygiene Regulations 1970 for offences relating to dirty and dangerous practices at La Maison. I have received a telephone call from the Environmental Health Officer." It was then, I'm afraid, that I started to laugh. I named the guilty party.
"The mouse!"
"Got it in one." Jean-Pierre didn't seem inclined to join in the joke.
"Ah, the wee, sleekit, cowering, timorous beastie," I quoted at him. has caused a panic in thy breasty. Ha ha! How delightful. We'll elect for trial before a jury. If we can't get you off, Mr. O'Higgins, at least we'll give them a little harmless entertainment. Of course, it wasn't really funny. A mouse in the wrong place, like too many milk bottles on a doorstep, might be a sign of passions stretched beyond control. I've always found it useful, before forming a view about a case, to inspect the scene of the crime. Accordingly, I visited La Maison Jean-Pierre one evening to study the ritual serving of dinner. Mr. Bernard and I stood in a corner of the kitchen at La Maison Jean-Pierre with our client. We were interested in the two waiters who had attended table 8, the site of the Erskine-Brown assignation. The senior of the two was Gaston, the station waiter, who had 4 tables under his command. Gaston Leblanc, Jean-Pierre told us, as he identified the small, fat, cheerful middle-aged man who trotted between the tables. Been with me forever. Works all the hours God gave to keep a sick wife and their kid at university. Does all sorts of other jobs in the daytime. The head waiter, Georges Pitou, takes the orders, of course, and leaves a copy of the note on the table. We saw Georges move, in a stately fashion, into the kitchen and hand the order for table 8 to a young cook in a white hat who stuck it up on the kitchen wall with a magnet. This was Ian, the sous chef. Jean-Pierre had discovered him in a Scottish hotel and wanted to encourage his talent. That night the bustle in the kitchen was muted, and as I looked through the circular window into the dining room, I saw that most of the white-clothed tables were standing empty, like small icebergs in a desolate polar region. When the prosecution had been announced, there had been a headline in the Evening Standard which read, "Guess who's coming to dinner? Mouse served in top London restaurant," and since then attendance at La Maison had dropped off sharply. The runner between Gaston's station and the kitchen was the commis waiter, Alphonse Pascal, a painfully thin, dark-eyed young man with a falling lock of hair who looked like the hero of some 19th-century French novel, interesting and doomed. As a matter of fact, Jean-Pierre told us, Alphonse is full of ambition. He's starting at the bottom and wants to work his way up to running a hotel. He's been with me for about a year. We watched as Ian put the 2 orders for table 8 on the serving table. In due course, Alphonse came into the kitchen and called out, "Number 8." "Ready, frog-face," Ian told him politely, and Alphonse came back with, "Merci, idiot." "Are they friends?" I asked my client. Not really. They're both much too fond of Mary." "Mary?" "Mary's Carte, the English girl who makes up the bills in the restaurant." I looked again through the circular window and saw the unmemorable girl, her head bent over her calculator. She seemed an unlikely subject for such rivalry. I saw Alphonse pass her with a tray, carrying 2 domed dishes, and although he looked in her direction, she didn't glance up from her work. Alphonse then took the dishes to the serving table at Gaston's station. Gaston looked under one dome to check its contents, and then the plates were put on the table. Gaston mouthed an inaudible "un, deux, trois." The domes were lifted before the diners, and not a mouse stirred. "On the night in question," Bernard reminded me, "Gaston says in his statement that he looked under the dome on the gentleman's plate." "And saw no side order of mouse," I remembered. "Exactly. So he gave the other to Alphonse, who took it to the lady." "And then hysterics. And then the reputation of England's greatest maître de cuisine crumbled to dust." Jean-Pierre spoke as though announcing a national disaster. "Nonsense." I did my best to cheer him up. "You're forgetting the reputation of Horace Rumpole." "You think we've got a defence?" my client asked eagerly. "I mean, now that you've looked at the kitchens." "Can't think of one for the moment," I admitted. "But I expect we'll cook up something in the end." Unencouraged, Jean-Pierre looked out into the dining room. muttered, "I'd better go and keep those lonely people company," and left us. I watched him pass the desk where Mary looked up and smiled, and I thought, however brutal he was with his customers, at least Jean-Pierre's staff seemed to find him a tolerable employer. And then, to my surprise, I saw him approach the couple at table 8, grinning in a most ingratiating manner, and stand chatting and bowing, as though they could have ordered doner kebab and chips, and that would have been perfectly all right by him. "You know," I said to Mr. Bernard, "it's quite extraordinary the power that can be wielded by one of the smaller rodents."
You mean it's wrecking his business?"
"No, more amazing than that. It's forced Jean-Pierre O'Higgins to be polite to his clientele." After my second visit to La Maison, events began to unfold at breakneck speed. First, our head of chambers, Soapy Sam Ballard, made it known to me that the brief he had accepted on behalf of the Health Authority, and of which he had boasted so flagrantly during the nail-brush incident, was in fact the prosecution of J.P. O'Higgins for the serious crime of being in charge of a rodent-infested restaurant. Then she who must be obeyed, true to her word, packed her grip and went off on a gastronomic tour with a man from Saskatoon. I was left to enjoy a lonely, high-calorie breakfast, with no fear of criticism over the matter of a fourth sausage, in the Tasty Bite Cafe, Fleet Street. Seated there one morning, enjoying the company of the Times crossword, I happened to overhear Miss Liz Probert, the dedicated young radical barrister in our chambers, talking to her close friend Dave Inchcape, whom she had persuaded us to take on in a somewhat devious manner. A barrister as young, but I think, at heart, a touch less radical than Miss Liz herself.
"You don't really care, do you, Dave?"
"Well, of course I care, Liz, deeply."
"Oh, well, perhaps you do. But there's an awful lot of loneliness about."
She looked in my direction.
"Get off to court, then, if you have to. But do think about it, Dave."
And then she got up and crossed to my table.
"Do you always have breakfast alone, Rumpole?"
She spoke in the tones of a deeply supportive social worker as she sat down opposite me. "It's not always possible," I said. "Much easier now, of course."
"Now? Why now, exactly?" She looked seriously concerned.
"Well, now my wife's left me," I told her cheerfully.
Oh, really? Where's she gone?"
"Oh, in search of gracious living with her cousin Everard from Saskatoon, a fellow with about as many jokes in him as the Dow Jones average."
"What? You mean she's gone off with another man?"
Liz seemed unable to believe that infidelity was not confined to the young. "Yes, that's about the size of it."
"But, Rumpole, why?"
"Because he's rich enough to afford very small portions of food."
"So you're living by yourself? You must be terribly lonely."
"Society is all but rude," I assured her, "to this delicious solitude." There was a pause, and then Liz took a deep breath and offered her assistance.
"You know, Rumpole, Dave and I have founded the YRL, Young Radical Lawyers. We don't only mean to reform the legal system, although that's part of it, of course. We're going to take on social work as well. We could always get someone to call and take a look at your flat every morning."
"Oh, yes, to make sure it's all right."
"No, Rumpole. As a matter of fact, to make sure you are."
Those who are alone have great opportunities for eavesdropping, and Liz and Dave weren't the only members of our chambers I heard engaged in a heart-to-heart that day. Before I took the journey back to the she-less flat, I dropped into Pomeroy's, and was enjoying the ham roll and bottle of Chateau Thames Embankment which would constitute my dinner, seated in one of the high-backed pew-like stalls Jack Pomeroy had installed, presumably to give the joint a vaguely medieval appearance and attract the tourists. From behind my back I heard the voices of our head of chambers and Claude Erskine Brown, who was saying, in his most ingratiating tones, "Ballard, I want to have a word with you about the case you've got against La Maison Jean-Pierre." To this, Ballard, in thoughtful tones, replied unexpectedly,
"A strong chain. It's the only answer."
Which didn't seem to follow.
"It was just my terrible luck, of course," Erskine Brown complained, "that it should happen at my table. I mean, I'm a pretty well-known member of the bar. Naturally, I don't want my name connected with, well, a rather ridiculous incident." "Fellows in chambers aren't going to like it."
Ballard was not yet with him.
"They'll say it's a restriction on their liberty. Rumpole, no doubt, will have a great deal to say about Magna Carta. But the only answer is to get a new nail brush and chain it up. Can I have your support in taking strong measures?"
"Oh, of course you can, Ballard. I'll be right behind you on this one." The creeping Claude seemed only too anxious to please. And in this case you're doing, I don't suppose you'll have to call the couple who actually got the mouse,
The couple?"
There was a pause while Ballard searched his memory.
The mouse was served, appalling lack of hygiene in the workplace, to a table booked by Mr. Claude Erskine Brown and guest. Of course he'll be a vital witness."
And then the penny dropped.
I mean, of course, you'll be a vital witness."
"But if I'm a witness of any sort, my name will get into the papers, and Philly will know I was having dinner."
"Well, why on earth shouldn't you know you were having dinner?"
Ballard was reasoning with the man.
"Most people have dinner. Nothing to be ashamed of. Get a grip on yourself, Erskine Brown."
"Ballard, Sam," Claude was trying to appeal to friendship. "You're a married man. You should understand."
"Of course I'm married. Marguerite and I have dinner on a regular basis."
"But I wasn't having dinner with Philly," Claude explained the matter carefully. "I was having dinner with an instructing solicitor."
That was your guest?"
"Yes."
"A solicitor?"
"Of course." Ballard seemed to have thought the matter over carefully, but he was still puzzled when he replied, remembering his instructions.
He apparently leapt onto a chair, held down his skirt, and screamed 3 times.
Ballard, the solicitor, was Tricia Benbow. You don't imagine I'd spend 100 and something quid on feeding the face of Mr. Bernard, do you?" There was another longish pause, during which I imagined Claude in considerable suspense, and then our head of chambers spoke again.
"Tricia Benbow?" he asked.
"Yes."
"Is that the one with the long blonde hair and rings?"
"That's the one."
"And your wife knew nothing of this?"
"And must never know." For some reason not clear to me, Claude seemed to think he'd won his case, for he now sounded grateful. "Oh, thank you, Ballard. Thanks awfully, Sam. I can count on you to keep my name out of this. I'll do the same for you, old boy, any day of the week."
"That won't be necessary."
Ballard's tone was not encouraging, although Claude said, "Oh, no? Well, thanks anyway."
"It will be necessary, however, for you to give evidence for the prosecution."
Soapy Sam Ballard pronounced sentence, and Claude yelped, "Oh, have a heart, Sam!"
"Don't you Sam me!"
Ballard was clearly in a mood to notice the decline of civilization as we know it.
"It's all part of the same thing, isn't it? Sharp practice over the nail brush, failure to assist the authorities in an important prosecution. You'd better prepare yourself for court, Erskine Brown, and to be cross-examined by Rumpole for the defence. Do your duty and take the consequences."
A moment later I saw Ballard leaving for home, and his wife Marguerite, who, you will remember, once held the position of matron at the Old Bailey. No doubt he would chatter to her of nail-brushes and barristers unwilling to tell the whole truth. I carried my bottle of plonk around to Claude's stall in order to console the fellow. "So," I said, You lost your case."
"What a bastard!"
I've never seen Claude so pale. "Ah, you made a big mistake, old darling. It's no good appealing to the warm humanity of a fellow who believes in chaining up nail brushes." So the intrusive mouse continued to play havoc with the passions of a number of people, and I prepared myself for its day in court. I told Mr. Bernard to instruct Ferdinand Isaac Gerald Newton, known in the trade as Fig Newton, a lugubrious scarecrow of a man who is, without doubt, our most effective private investigator, to keep a watchful eye on the staff of La Maison. And then I decided to call in at the establishment on my way home one evening, not only to get a few more facts from my client, but because I was becoming bored with Pomeroy's ham rolls. Before I left chambers, an event occurred which caused me deep satisfaction. I made for the downstairs lavatory, and although the door was open, I found it occupied by Uncle Tom, who was busily engaged at the basin washing his collection of golf balls, and scrubbing each one to a gleaming whiteness with a nail-brush. He'd been putting each one, when cleaned, into a biscuit tin, and as I entered he dropped the nail-brush in also. "Uncle Tom!" I recognized the article at once. "That's the Chambers nail-brush. Soapy Sam's having kittens about it."
"Oh, dear. Is it really? I must have taken it without remembering. I'll leave it on the basin."
But I persuaded him to let me have it for safe keeping, saying I longed to see Ballard's little face light up with joy when it was restored to him. When I arrived at La Maison, the disputes seemed to have become a great deal more dramatic than even in Equity Court. The place was not yet open for dinner, but I was let in as the restaurant's legal adviser, and I heard raised voices and sounds of a struggle from the kitchen. Pushing the door open, I found Jean-Pierre in the act of forcibly removing a knife from the hands of Ian, the sous chef, at whom an excited Alphonse Pascal, his lock of black hair falling into his eyes, was shouting abuse in French. My arrival created a diversion in which both men calmed down, and Jean-Pierre passed judgment on them. "Bloody lunatics," he said. "Haven't they done this place enough harm already? They have to start slaughtering each other. Behave yourself. Soyez sage." "What can I do for you, Mr. Rumpole?" "Well, perhaps we can have a little chat," I suggested as the tumult died down. "I thought I'd call in. My wife's away, you see, and I haven't done much about dinner." "Then what would you like?" Anything. Just a snack. Some pâté, perhaps, and a bottle of champagne." I thought he'd never ask. When we were seated at a table in a corner of the empty restaurant, the patron told me more about the quarrel. They were fighting again over Mary Skelton. I looked across at the desk where the unmemorable girl was getting out her calculator and preparing for her evening's work. "She doesn't look the type exactly," I suggested. "Perhaps," Jean-Pierre speculated. "She has a warm heart. My wife Simone looks the type, but she's got a heart like an ice cube." Your wife, the vengeful woman. I remembered what Mr. Bernard had told me. "Why should she be vengeful to me, Mr. Rumpole, when I'm a particularly tolerant and easy-going type of individual?" At which point a couple of middle-aged Americans appeared at the door of the restaurant and asked if he was serving dinner. "At 6:30? No, and we don't do teas either," he shouted across at them in a momentary return to his old form. "Cretins!" "Oh, of course," I told him, "you're a very parfait, gentle cook. A great artist needs admiration. He needs almost incessant praise." And with Simone, I suggested, the admiration flowed like concrete. "You got it. Had some experience of wives, have you?" "You might say a lifetime's experience. Do you mind?" I poured myself another glass of champagne. No, of course." "And your wife doesn't understand you?" "Oh, I'm afraid she does. That's the worrying thing about it. She blames me for being a character." "They'd blame you for anything.
Come to divorce, has it? Not quite reached your stage, Mr. Higgins. I looked around the restaurant. So I suppose you have to keep these tables full to pay Simon her alimony. Not exactly. You see, she'll own half of La Maison. That hadn't been entirely clear to me. I asked him to explain. When we started off, I was a young man. All I wanted to do was to get up early, go to Smithfield and Billingsgate and feel the lobsters and smell the fresh scallops, create new dishes, and dream of sauces. Simone was the one with the business sense. Well, she's French, so she insisted on us getting married in France. Oh, was that wrong? Oh, no, it was absolutely right for Simone, because they have a damn thing there called community of property. I had to agree to give her half of everything if we ever broke up. You know about the law, of course. Well, no, not everything about it. Community of property, I must confess, came as news to me. I always found knowing the law a bit of a handicap for a barrister. Oh, Simone knew all about it. She had a beady eye on the future. He emptied his glass and then looked at me pleadingly. You're going to get us out of this little trouble, aren't you, Mr. Rumpole? This affair of the mouse. Oh, the mouse. I did my best to reassure him. The mouse seems to be the least of your worries. Soon Jean-Pierre had to go back to his kitchen. On his way, he stopped at the cash desk and said something to the girl, Mary. She looked up at him with, I thought, unqualified adoration. He patted her arm and went back to his sources, reassuring her, I suppose, about the quarrel that had been going on in her honour. I did justice to the rest of the champagne and pâté de foie, and started off for home. Several evenings later I was lying on my couch in the living-room of the mansion flat, a small cigar between my fingers and a glass of Chateau Fleet Street on the floor beside me. I was in vacant or in pensive mood as I heard a ring at the front doorbell. I started up, afraid that the delights of haute cuisine had palled for Hilda, and then I remembered that she would undoubtedly have come armed with a latchkey. I approached the front door, puzzled at the sound of young and excited voices without, combined with loud music. I got the door open and found myself face to face with Liz Probert, Dave Inchcape, and 5 or 6 other junior hacks, all wearing sweatshirts with a picture of a wig and Young Radical Lawyers written on them. Diane was also there in trousers and a glittery top, escorted by my clerk Henry, wearing jeans and doing his best to appear young and swinging. The party was carrying various bottles and an article we know well down the Bailey, because it so often appears in lists of stolen property as a ghetto blaster. It was from this contraption that the loud music emerged. "A surprise party, Rumpole!" Ms. Liz Probert announced with considerable pride. "We've come to cheer you up in your great loneliness." Nothing I could say would stem the well-meaning invasion. Within minutes the staid precincts of Froxbury Mansions were transformed into the sort of disco which is patronized by under-30s on a package tour to the Costa del Sol. Bizarre drinks such as rum and black currant juice or advocaat and lemonade were being mixed in what remained of our tumblers, supplemented by tooth mugs from the bathroom. Scarves dimmed the lights, the ghetto blaster blasted ceaselessly, and dancers gyrated in a self-absorbed manner, apparently oblivious of each other. Only Henry and Diane, practising a more old-fashioned ritual, clung together, almost motionless, and carried on a lively conversation with me as I stood on the outskirts of the revelry, drinking the best of the wine they had brought, and trying to look tolerantly convivial. "We heard as how Mrs. Rumpole had done a bunk, sir." "Some people have all the luck," said Henry. "Why, where's your wife tonight, Henry?" I asked my clerk. The cross he has to bear is that his spouse has pursued an ambitious career in local government, so that whereas she is now the mayor of Bexley Heath, he is officially her mayoress.
My wife's at a dinner of South London mayors in the Mansion House, Mr. Rumpole. No consorts allowed, thank God, he told me.
Which is why we're both on the loose tonight. Makes you feel young again, doesn't it, Mr. Rumpole?
Diane asked as she danced minimally. Well, no, not particularly young, as a matter of fact. The music yawned between me and my guests as an unbridgeable generation gap. And then one of the more intense of the young lady radicals approached me, as a senior member of the bar, to ask what the hell the Lord Chief Justice knew about being pregnant and on probation at the time your boyfriend's arrested for dope. Oh, very little, I should imagine, I had to tell her. And then, as the telephone was bleating pathetically beneath the din, I excused myself and moved to answer it. As I went, a YRL sweatshirt whirled past me. Liz, dancing energetically, had pulled it off, and was gyrating in what appeared to be an ancient string vest and a pair of jeans.
"Rumpole?"
The voice of she who must be obeyed called to me, no doubt from the banks of Duddon.
"What on earth's going on there?"
"Oh, Hilda, is it you?"
"Of course it's me."
Having a good time, are you? Did Cousin Everard enjoy his sliver of whatever it was?"
"Rumpole, what's that incredible noise?"
Noise? Is there a noise? Oh, yes, I think I do hear music. Here I improvised, as I thought, brilliantly. It's a play, that's what it is, yes. It's a play on television. It's all about young people hopping about in a curious fashion.
"Don't talk rubbish."
Hilda, as you may guess, sounded far from convinced.
"You know you never watch plays on television."
"Well, not usually, I grant you," I admitted. "But what else have I got to do when my wife has left me?" Much later, it seemed a lifetime later, when the party was over, I settled down to read the latest addition to my brief in the O'Higgins case. It was a report from Fig Newton, who had been keeping observation on the workers at La Maison. One afternoon he followed Gaston Leblanc, who had left his home in Ruislip with a large suitcase, with which he travelled to a smart address at Egerton Crescent in Knightsbridge. This house, which had a bunch of brilliantly coloured balloons tied to its front door, Fig kept under surveillance for some time. A number of small children arrived, escorted by nannies, and were let in by a manservant. Later, when all the children had been received, Fig, wrapped in his Burberry, with his collar turned up against the rain, was able to move, so as to get a clear view into the sitting-room. What he saw interested me greatly. The children were seated on the floor, watching breathlessly as Gaston Leblanc, station waiter and part-time conjurer, dressed in a black robe ornamented with stars, entertained them by slowly extricating a live and kicking rabbit from a top hat. For the trial of Jean-Pierre O'Higgins we drew the short straw, in the shape of an Old Bailey judge aptly named Gerald Graves. Judge Graves and I never exactly hit it off. He's a pale, long-faced, unsmiling fellow who probably lives on a diet of organic bran and carrot juice. He heard Ballard open the proceedings against La Maison with a pained expression, and looked at me over his half-glasses as though I were a saucepan that hadn't been washed up properly. He was the last person in the world to laugh a case out of court, and I would have to manage that trick without him. Soapy Sam Ballard began by describing the minor blemishes in the restaurant's kitchen.
"In this highly expensive, allegedly 3-star establishment, the environmental health officer discovered cracked tiles, open waste bins, and gravy stains on the ceiling." "The ceiling, Mr. Ballard?" the judge repeated in sepulchral tones. "Alas, yes, my lord, the ceiling."
"Obviously not a short-order cook," I suggested, and was rewarded by a freezing look from the bench.
"And there was a complete absence of nail brushes in the kitchen hand basins," Ballard touched on a subject dear to his heart. "But wait, members of the jury, until you get to the main course," I suggested in another ill-received whisper, and Ballard surged on, "to the very heart of this most serious case. On the night of May the 18th, a common house mouse was served up at a customer's dinner table." "We are no doubt dealing here, Mr. Ballard," the judge intoned solemnly, "with a defunct mouse." "Again, alas, no, my lord. The mouse in question was alive." "And kicking," I muttered. Staring vaguely around the court, my eye lit on the public gallery, where I saw Mary Skelton, the quiet restaurant clerk, watching the proceedings attentively. "Members of the jury," Ballard had reached his peroration, "need one ask if a kitchen is in breach of the food and hygiene regulations if it serves up a living mouse? As proprietor of the restaurant, Mr. O'Higgins is, says the prosecution, absolutely responsible. Whomsoever in his employ seeks to blame, members of the jury, he must take the consequences. I will now call my first witness." "Who's that pompous imbecile?" Jean-Pierre O'Higgins was adding his 2 pennyworth, but I told him he wasn't in his restaurant now and to leave the insults to me. I was watching a fearful and embarrassed Claude Erskine-Brown climb into the witness box and take the oath as though it were the last rites. When asked to give his full name, he appealed to the judge. "My lord, may I write them down? There may be some publicity about this case." He looked nervously at the assembled reporters. "Aren't you a member of the bar?" Judge Graves squinted at the witness over his half-glasses. "Well, yes, my lord," Claude admitted reluctantly. "That's nothing to be ashamed of. In most cases," at which the judge aimed a look of distaste in my direction, and then turned back to the witness, "I think you'd better tell the jury who you are in the usual way." "Claude," the unfortunate fellow tried a husky whisper, only to get a testy, "Oh, do speak up," from his lordship, whereupon, turning up the volume a couple of notches, the witness answered, "Claude Leonard Erskine-Brown." I hadn't known about the Leonard. "On May the 18th, were you dining at La Maison Jean-Pierre?" Ballard began his examination. "Well, yes, I did just drop in." "For dinner?" Yes," Claude had to admit. "In the company of a young lady named Patricia Benbow?" Well, that is, Mr. Erskine-Brown." Judge Graves had no sympathy with his sudden speech impediment. "It seems a fairly simple question to answer, even for a member of the bar." I was in Miss Benbow's company, my lord," Claude answered in despair. "And when the main course was served, were the plates covered?" "Yes, they were." "And when the covers were lifted, what happened?" Into the expectant silence Erskine-Brown said in a still, small voice, "A mouse ran out." "Oh, do speak up!" Graves was running out of patience with the witness, who almost shouted back, "A mouse ran out, my lord." At this point Ballard said, "Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Brown," and sat down, no doubt confident that the case was in the bag, or perhaps the trap. Then I rose to cross-examine. "Mr. Claude Leonard Erskine-Brown," I weighed in. "Is Miss Benbow a solicitor?" "Well, yes." Claude looked at me sadly, as though waiting to say, "Et tu, Rumpole?" "And is your wife a well-known and highly regarded Queen's Counsel?" Graves' face lit up at the mention of our delightful Portia. Mrs. Erskine Brown has sat here as a recorder, members of the jury." He smiled sickeningly at the 12 honest citizens. "I'm obliged, your lordship." I bowed slightly and turned back to the witness. "And is Miss Benbow instructed in an important forthcoming case, that is, the Balham minicab murder, in which she is intending to brief Mrs. Erskine Brown, Q.C.?" Is she?" Never quick off the mark, Claude didn't yet realize that help was at hand. "And were you taking her out to dinner so you might discuss the defence in that case, your wife having unfortunately been detained in Cardiff?" I hope that made my good intentions clear, even to a barrister. Was I?" Erskine Brown was still not with me. "Well, weren't you?" I was losing patience with the fellow. "Oh, yes." At last the penny dropped. "Of course I was. I do remember now, naturally. And I did it all to help Philly, to help my wife. Is that what you mean?" He ended up looking at me anxiously. "Exactly." "Oh, thank you, Mr. Rumpole, thank you very much." Erskine Brown's gratitude was pathetic, but the judge couldn't wait to get on to the exciting bits. "Mr. Rumpole," he boomed mournfully, "when are we coming to the mouse?" Oh yes, I am grateful to your lordship for reminding me. What sort of animal was it?" "Oh, a very small mouse indeed." Claude was now desperately anxious to help me. Hardly noticeable." "A very small mouse and hardly noticeable," Graves repeated as he wrote it down, and then raised his eyebrows, as though when it came to mice smallness was no excuse. "And the first you saw of it was when it emerged from under a silver dish-cover. You couldn't swear it got there in the kitchen?" No, I couldn't." Erskine Brown was still eager to cooperate. "Or if it was inserted in the dining-room by someone with access to the serving table?" No, Mr. Rumpole, you're perfectly right. Of course it might have been." The witness's cooperation was almost embarrassing, so the judge chipped in with, "I take it you're not suggesting that this creature appeared from a dish of duck breasts by some sort of miracle, are you, Mr. Rumpole?" Not a miracle, my lord. Perhaps a trick." "Isn't Mr. Ballard perfectly right?" Graves, as was his wont, had joined the prosecution team. "For the purposes of this offence, it doesn't matter how it got there. A properly run restaurant should not serve up a mouse for dinner. The thing speaks for itself." "Oh, a talking mouse, my lord. What an interesting conception." I got a loud laugh from my client, and even the jury joined in with a few friendly titters. I also got, of course, a stern rebuke from the bench. "Mr. Rumpole," his lordship's seriousness was particularly deadly, "this is not a place of entertainment. You would do well to remember that this is a most serious case from your client's point of view, and I am sure the jury would wish to give it the most weighty consideration. We will continue with it after luncheon. Shall we say 2:05, members of the jury?" Mr. Bernard and I went down to the pub, and after a light snack of shepherd's pie, washed down with a pint or two of Guinness, we hurried back into the Palais de Justice, and there I found what I had hoped for. Mary Skelton was sitting quietly outside the court, waiting for the proceedings to resume. I lit a small cigar and took a seat with my instructing solicitor not far away from the girl. I raised my voice a little and said, "You know what's always struck me about this case, Mr. Bernard? There's no evidence of droppings or any sign whatever of mice in the kitchen. So someone put the mouse under the cover deliberately. Someone who wanted to ruin La Maison's business." Mrs. O'Higgins?" Bernard suggested.
"Oh, certainly not. She'd want the place to be as prosperous as possible, because she owned half of it. The guilty party is someone who wanted Simone to get nothing but half a failed eatery with a ruined reputation. So what did this someone do?"
You tell me, Mr. Rumpole." Mr. Bernard was an excellent straight man.
"Oh, broke a lot of little rules, took away the nail brushes and the lids of the tidy bins. But a sensation was needed, something that had hit the headlines. Luckily, this someone knew a waiter who had a talent for sleight of hand, and a spare-time job amusing children by producing livestock out of hats."
"Gaston Leblanc?"
Bernard was with me. "Exactly. He got the animal under the lid and gave it to Alphonse to present to the unfortunate Miss Tricia Benbow. Consequence? Ruin for the restaurant and a rotten investment for the vengeful Simone. No doubt someone paid Gaston well to do it."
I was silent then. I didn't look at the waiting girl, but I was sure that she was looking at me. And then Bernard said, Who are we talking about, Mr. Rumpole?"
"Well, now, who had the best possible reason for hating Simone, and wanted her to get away with as little as possible?"
"Who?"
"Well, who but our client?" I told him. "The great maître de cuisine, Jean-Pierre O'Higgins himself."
"No!" I had never heard Mary Skelton speaking before. Her voice was clear and determined, with a slight North Country accent. "Excuse me." I turned to look at her as she stood up and came over to us. "No, it's not true. Jean-Pierre knew nothing about it. Was my idea entirely. Why did she deserve to get anything out of us?" I stood up, looked at my watch, and put on the wig that had been resting on the seat beside me.
"Well, back to court. Mr. Bernard, take a statement from the lady, why don't you?"
"We'll call her as a witness."
Whilst these events were going on down the Bailey, another kind of drama was being enacted in Froxbury Mansions. She who must be obeyed had returned from her trip with cousin Everard, put on the kettle, and surveyed the general disorder left by my surprise party with deep disapproval. In the sitting-room she fanned away the bar-room smell, drew the curtains, opened the windows, and clicked her tongue at the sight of half-empty glasses and lipstick-stained fag ends. Then she noticed something white nestling under the sofa, pulled it out, and saw that it was a young radical lawyer's sweatshirt, redolent of Miss Liz Probert's understated yet feminine perfume. Later in the day, when I was still on my hind legs performing before Mr. Justice Graves and the jury, Liz Probert called at the mansion flat to collect the missing garment. Hilda had met Liz at occasional chambers parties, but when she opened the door she was, I am sure, stony-faced, and remained so as she led Miss Probert into the sitting-room, and restored to her the sweatshirt which the young radical lawyer admitted she had taken off and left the night before. I have done my best to reconstruct the following dialogue from the accounts given to me by the principal performers. I can't vouch for its total accuracy, but this is the gist, the meat, you understand. It began when Liz explained that she had taken the sweatshirt off because she was dancing and it was quite hot. "You were dancing with Rumpole?" Hilda was outraged. "I knew he was up to something. As soon as my back was turned, I heard all that going on when I telephoned, rocking and rolling all over the place. At his age—" "Mrs. Rumpole, Hilda!" Liz began to protest, but only provoked a brisk, "Oh, please, don't you Hilda me? Young radical lawyers. I suppose that means you're free and easy with other people's husbands." At which point I regret to report that Liz Probert could scarcely contain her laughter, and asked, You don't think I fancy Rumpole, do you?" "I don't know why not." Hilda had her moments of loyalty. "Rumpole is a character. Some people like that sort of thing." "Oh, Hilda, look, please, listen." And Liz began to explain.
Dave Inchcape and I and a whole lot of us came to give Rumpole a party to cheer him up because he was lonely. He was missing you so terribly." "He was what?"
She who must could scarcely believe her ears, Liz told me.
"Missing you," the young radical repeated. "I saw him at breakfast. He looked so sad. 'She's left me,' he said, 'and gone off with her cousin Everard.'" "Rumpole said that?" Hilda no longer sounded displeased. "And he seemed absolutely broken-hearted. He saw nothing ahead, I'm sure, but a lonely old age stretching out in front of him. Anyone could tell how much he cared about you. Dave noticed it as well. Oh, please, can I have my shirt back now?"
"Of course." Hilda was now treating the girl as though she were the prodigal grandchild or some such thing.
"But wouldn't you like it washed and ironed before you take it home, Liz?"
Back in the Ludgate Circus verdict factory, Mary Skelton gave evidence along the lines I have already indicated, and the time came for me to make my final speech. As I reached the last stretch, I felt I was making some progress. No one in the jury box was asleep or suffering from terminal bronchitis, and a few of them looked distinctly sympathetic. The same couldn't be said, however, of the scorpion on the bench. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," I gave it to them straight, "Miss Mary Skelton, the cashier, was in love. She was in love with her boss, that larger-than-life cook and character, Jean-Pierre O'Higgins. People do many strange things for love. They commit suicide, they leave home, or sometimes just pine away. It was for love that Miss Mary Skelton caused a mouse to be served up in La Maison Jean-Pierre after she had paid the station waiter liberally for performing the trick. She it was who wanted to ruin the business so that my client's vengeful wife should get absolutely nothing out of it. Mr. Rumpole," his lordship was unable to contain his fury, "and my client knew nothing whatever of this dire plot. He was entirely innocent." I didn't want to let Graves interrupt my flow, but he came in at increased volume. "Mr. Rumpole, if a restaurant serves unhygienic food, the proprietor is guilty. In law, it does not matter in the least how it got there. Ignorance by your client is no excuse. I presume you have some rudimentary knowledge of the law, Mr. Rumpole?" I wasn't going to tangle with Graves on legal matters. Instead, I confined my remarks to the more reasonable jury, ignoring the judge. "You are not concerned with the law, members of the jury," I told them. "You are concerned with justice." "That is a quite outrageous thing to say. On the admitted facts of this case, Mr. O'Higgins is clearly guilty," His Honour Judge Graves had decided, but the honest 12 would have to return the verdict. And I spoke to them. "A British judge has no power to direct a British jury to find a defendant guilty." I knew that much at least. "I shall tell the jury that he is guilty in law. I warn you." Graves' warning was in vain. I carried on, regardless. "His lordship may tell you that to his heart's content. As a great Lord Chief Justice of England, a judge superior in rank to any in this court, once said, it is the duty of the judge to tell you as a jury what to do, but you have the power to do exactly as you like. And what you do, members of the jury, is a matter entirely between God and your own consciences. Can you really find it in your consciences to condemn a man to ruin for a crime he did not commit?" I looked straight at them. "Can any of you? Can you?" I gripped the desk in front of me, apparently exhausted. "You are the only judges of the facts in this case, members of the jury. My task is done. The future career of Jean-Pierre O'Higgins is in your hands, and in your hands alone." And then I sat down, clearly, deeply moved. At last it was over. As we came out of the doors of the court, Jean-Pierre O'Higgins embraced me in a bear hug and was, I greatly feared, about to kiss me on both cheeks. Ballard gave me a look of pale disapproval. Clearly he thought I had broken all the rules by asking the jury to ignore the judge. Then a cheerful and rejuvenated Claude came bouncing up, bleating, "Oh, Rumpole, you were brilliant!" "Oh, yes," I told him. "I've still got a win or two in me yet." "Brilliant to get me off! All that nonsense about a brief for Philly." "Not nonsense, Leonard. I mean Claude. I telephoned the fair Tricia, and she is sending your wife the Ballamini cab murder. Are you suggesting that Rumpole would deceive the court?" "Ah," he was interested to know. Am I getting a brief too?" "Oh, she said nothing of that." All the same, Rumpole," he concealed his disappointment, "thank you very much for getting me out of a scrape." "Oh, say no more. My life is devoted to helping the criminal classes." As I left him and went upstairs to slip out of the fancy dress, I had one more task to perform. I walked past my locker and went into the silks dressing-room, where a very old QC was seated in the shadows, snoozing over the Daily Telegraph. I had seen Ballard downstairs discussing the hopelessness of an appeal with his solicitor, and it was the work of a minute to find his locker, feel in his jacket pocket, and haul a large purse out of it. Making sure that the sleeping silk hadn't spotted me, I opened the purse, slipped in the nail brush I had rescued from Uncle Tom's tin of golf balls, restored it to the pocket, and made my escape undetected. I was ambling back up Fleet Street when I heard the brisk step of Ballard behind me. He drew up alongside and returned to his favourite topic. "There's nothing for it, Rumpole," he said. "I shall chain the next one up." We had reached the newspaper stand at the entrance to the temple, and I loitered there. "Oh, lend us 20 pence for the Evening Standard, Ballard, will you? There might be another restaurant in trouble." "Are you never provided with money?" "Here." And he put his hand in his pocket and pulled out his purse. Opening it, he was amazed to find his small change nestling under an ancient nail-brush. "How on earth did that get in there?" "Oh, evidence gets in everywhere, old darling," I told him. "Just like mice." As I unlocked the front door, I was greeted with the familiar cry. "Is that you, Rumpole?" "No," I shouted, "it's not me. I'll be along later. Don't bother cooking, Hilda. We're going out for a celebratory dinner. I know somewhere where we can get it on the house. The silver domes were put in front of us. Alphonse called out, "Un, deux, trois," and they were lifted to reveal what I had had no difficulty in ordering that night. Steak and kidney pud. Mashed spuds were brought on the side. I looked toward the cashier's desk, where Jean-Pierre had his arm around the girl I had found so unmemorable. I raised a glass of the champagne he had brought us and drank to their very good health, and then took my first forkful of pud. "Oh, Hilda," I murmured, "not a patch on yours." "Oh, Rumpole," she said, "you are a character."